The dust rolled in low across the prairie that afternoon, thin as smoke and just as restless. It carried the smell of dry grass and old wood, the kind of smell that clung to a man's clothes long after he left the open land. He leaned against the worn fence outside his small ranch, hat tilted forward, eyes narrowed against the sun. Life out here had a way of staying quiet, almost too quiet, like it was waiting for something to happen. He had built that silence for himself. 10 years had passed since the day everything changed. 10 years since he had ridden farther than he should have, into trouble that was not his to carry. Folks around the nearest town still spoke about it sometimes, though never when he was near. They called it a brave thing. Some called it foolish. He never called it anything at all. Back then, he was younger, quicker to act, slower to think. The land was rougher too, or maybe it only felt that way because he had less patience for it. He remembered the heat that day, how it pressed down hard, how the sky looked too wide and empty. He had been riding along the edge of a dry creek when he heard the shouting. Not the kind of shouting that meant a fight between men who could settle it themselves. This was different, sharper, urgent. He had followed the sound without thinking. 3 riders had been cornered near a stand of broken trees, women, young, but not helpless. They held themselves steady, even with danger closing in. Their horses were nervous, stamping and pulling at the reins. Around them were men who did not belong there, men with hard eyes and harder intentions. He had not stopped to weigh his chances. Sometimes a man acts because standing still feels worse. What followed was quick and messy. Dust, noise, the crack of gunfire, the kind of moment where time stretches and snaps all at once. When it was over, the men were gone, either scattered or worse, and the land fell quiet again, too quiet. The 3 women had not run. They stayed, watching him with eyes that said more than words ever could. There was strength there, pride, and something else he could not name back then. They thanked him, but not in the way most would. There were no long speeches, no trembling voices. Just a steady look, a nod, and a promise spoken in a tone that did not sound like a promise at all. We will not forget this. At the time, he had shrugged it off. People say things in moments like that. Gratitude has a way of sounding bigger than it is. He tipped his hat, told them to ride safe, and went his own way. He never expected to see them again. Years passed, and the memory faded into the background of his life, like an old scar that no longer hurt. He worked his land, fixed his fences, traded in town when he had to. He kept to himself mostly. It was easier that way. Sometimes, though, on quiet nights when the wind slipped through the cracks of his cabin, he would think about that day. About the way those women had looked at him, not like he was a hero, not like he had saved them, but like something had begun. He never stayed with that thought long. The past had a way of pulling a man into places he had no business going. So when the dust rose again on that afternoon, 10 years later, he did not think much of it at first. Riders passed by his land from time to time. Travelers, traders, the occasional lost soul looking for direction. It was nothing new. But as the shapes grew clearer against the horizon, something in his chest tightened. 3 riders. They moved in a line, steady and sure, like they knew exactly where they were going. Their horses were strong, their pace unhurried, there was no hesitation in them. He straightened from the fence, eyes fixed on the approaching figures. As they came closer, details began to form, the way they sat their horses, the way their hair moved with the wind, the quiet confidence in their posture, a memory stirred. By the time they reached the gate, there was no doubt left. They had changed, of course. Time does that. Their faces carried more years now, more stories. But the strength was still there, the same steady presence, the same unshaken look in their eyes. They stopped just a few feet from him, their horses calm despite the long ride. For a moment no one spoke. The air felt heavier, like the land itself was holding its breath. He took off his hat slowly, more out of habit than thought. "I reckon I know you," he said, his voice rough from disuse. One of them smiled faintly, though it did not soften the seriousness in her gaze. "You should. It has been 10 years. 10 years." Hearing it out loud made it feel shorter and longer all at once. He nodded once. "Didn't think I'd see you again. We said we would not forget," another one replied. There was no pride in her voice, no accusation either, just a simple truth. He shifted his weight, unsure of what came next. People did not ride this far for nothing, not out here. You've come a long way, he said. Must be a reason. The three women exchanged a glance, something passing between them that he could not read. Then the one in the center leaned forward slightly in her saddle. There is a reason, she said. The wind picked up, tugging at his shirt, carrying that same restless dust between them. For a second he thought they might ask for help. Maybe trouble had followed them again. Maybe something from the past had come back around. He was ready for that, ready to saddle up, to ride out, to do what needed doing. But what she said next stopped him cold. We came to find you, she said. To ask you something. He frowned, a small crease forming between his brows. Ask me what? The three of them dismounted at the same time, their boots hitting the ground with quiet certainty. They stood together, not behind one another, not apart. Together, the one in the center stepped forward, just close enough that he could see every detail in her face. The years had not taken anything from her. If anything, they had added to it. She looked him straight in the eye. Marry us? For a moment, the world seemed to lose its sound. The wind, the distant creak of wood, even the quiet shifting of the horses all faded into nothing. All that remained was the weight of those two words hanging in the air between them. He blinked, certain he had heard wrong. I'm sorry, he said slowly. What did you just say? None of them smiled. None of them looked unsure. You heard it, the one on the right said. We have come to marry you. His grip tightened on his hat. Of all the things he had expected, this was not one of them, not even close. You ride out here after 10 years, he said, his voice sharper now, and that's what you bring me. It is not a small thing, the one on the left replied. We would not have come if it were. He let out a breath, shaking his head once as if that might clear it. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. You don't just ask a man something like that. Not out of nowhere. It is not out of nowhere, the one in the center said, her tone steady. It began the day you chose to help us. He looked at each of them in turn, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was some kind of misunderstanding. He found none. The dust swirled again, curling around their boots, rising into the space between them like a curtain. 10 years ago, he had stepped into trouble without thinking. Now, trouble had come back to his doorstep, wearing a different face. He swallowed, his mind racing, trying to find something solid to hold on to in a moment that felt anything but real. You don't know what you're asking, he said finally. The one in the center tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. Oh, we do, she said. The question is, do you? He opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. Because deep down, beneath the confusion and the disbelief, there was something else rising up. Something he had not felt in a long time. And as the wind carried the dust past them, his answer caught in his throat, unfinished, hanging there just like the question itself. He lowered his hand slowly, the hat still clenched tight in his fingers. For a long moment he said nothing. The wind moved past them like it had somewhere else to be, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. You picked the wrong ranch, he said at last, though his voice lacked the strength he wanted it to have. The three women did not move. Not even a shift of their boots in the dirt. No, the one in the center replied. We picked the only one. That answer sat in his chest in a way he did not like. It pushed against something he had kept buried for years. He turned his head slightly, looking past them toward the open land, as if expecting someone else to ride in and break the moment apart. No one came. You better come inside, he muttered, more to buy himself time than anything else. Standing out here won't make this make any more sense. They followed without hesitation. That, more than anything, unsettled him. Most folks showed some caution stepping into a stranger's home. These three carried none of it. They walked like they had already decided something long before they arrived. Inside the cabin, the air was cooler, though it did little to ease the tension. The place was simple. A table, a few chairs, a stove in the corner, and a bed pushed against the far wall. Everything had its place. Everything had a purpose. He set his hat down on the table and poured water into 4 cups. His hands moved out of habit, steady even when his thoughts were not. Drink, he said, sliding the cups toward them. They accepted, but their attention never drifted far from him. It made him feel like he was the one being studied now. For a while, the only sound was the quiet sip of water and the soft creak of wood as the cabin settled. Then he leaned back against the table, folding his arms. "Start talking," he said. "Because right now, none of this adds up." The one in the center stepped forward again. It was clear she spoke for the others, though they stood just as firm behind her. 10 years ago," she began, "you crossed a line most men would not. You stepped into a fight that was not yours." "I remember," he said, though his tone was short. "Doesn't mean I understand this." "You did more than break a fight," she continued, ignoring his interruption. "You changed the path we were on." That caught his attention, though he tried not to show it. "How so?" he asked. The woman on the right spoke this time. "We were being taken, not just for that day. For a life we did not choose." He frowned, the memory sharpening in his mind. He had known it was bad. He had seen enough to understand that much. But he had never asked what came after. "You got away," he said. "That should have been the end of it." "It was the beginning," the one on the left said quietly. He let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right, say I believe that." "Still doesn't explain why you ride out here 10 years later asking something like that." The three of them exchanged another look, longer this time. There was something in it he still could not read, something deeper than simple agreement. "We made a promise," the one in the center said. He gave a dry laugh, though there was no humor in it. "People make promises all the time. Doesn't mean they hold on to them for a decade." "We do," she said. That shut him up. The weight of her words was different, not stubborn, not emotional, just certain. He pushed himself off the table and started pacing, boots thudding softly against the wooden floor. "So what, you decided back then that this was your plan? That you'd come find me and say this?" "No," the one on the right answered. "Not like that. Then how?" he pressed. They did not answer right away. Instead, the one on the left moved closer to the small window, looking out at the land as if the answer might be written somewhere in the distance. "We went home," she said slowly, "back to our people. Back to a place where we could choose again. And we did choose," the one in the center added. "But the choice was not simple." He stopped pacing and looked at them. "Nothing ever is?" "There were expectations," she continued. "Paths laid out for us. Roles we were meant to step into." "Sounds like most places," he said. She shook her head slightly. "Not like this. These were not small things. They would shape not just us, but others around us." He leaned against the wall now, watching them carefully. "So you walked away from all that?" "We did not walk away," the one on the right said. "We stood against it." That word hung there, against. He knew what it meant to stand against something bigger than yourself. It rarely ended clean. "And this," he gestured between them, "this is part of that?" "Yes." The answer came from all three at once. He let out another breath, longer this time. "You're asking a man you barely know to step into something that sounds bigger than all of us." "We know enough," the one in the center said. "You don't," he shot back. "You know one day, one moment. That ain't a life." She held his gaze without flinching. "It was not just a moment to us." Something in her voice made him pause. For the first time he saw it clearly. Not just strength or pride, but something deeper. Something that had been carried, shaped, and held onto for years. "You kept thinking about that day," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. "We remembered what it meant," she corrected. He shook his head again, though it felt weaker now. "Still doesn't explain why me. There are other men." "Better men." "No," the one on the left said firmly. "There are not." He almost smiled at that, but it didn't quite reach his face. "You don't know that." "We do," the one on the right said. "Because we have seen them." That answer brought a different kind of silence into the room. "What do you mean?" he asked. Again they hesitated. Then the one in the center stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. "The men who came for us that day were not the last." His jaw tightened. "You're saying there's still trouble?" "We are saying the world we come from has not grown quieter," she replied. A slow, uneasy feeling settled in his chest. "And you think bringing me into it fixes that?" "No," she said. "But it changes it." He looked away, running a hand through his hair. This was turning into something far bigger than a strange request. Bigger than a simple answer. "You should have led with that," he muttered. We needed to know if you were still the same man first, the one on the left said. He glanced back at them. And? The three of them studied him again just like they had outside. That is what we are still deciding, the one in the center said. He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Funny, I thought I was the one supposed to decide something here. You are, she said. But so are we. The balance of it shifted then. It was no longer just their question hanging in the air. It was something shared, something uncertain on both sides. He walked back to the table, picking up his hat again, turning it slowly in his hands. You ride all this way, he said. Carry a promise for 10 years, stand against whatever you've been dealing with, and then walk in here asking me to marry you. You expect me to just say yes? No, she said softly. We expect you to understand what you are saying yes to. He looked up at that. And what exactly is that? He asked. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in her expression, not doubt. Not fear, something closer to warning. A life that will not stay quiet, she said. The words settled deep. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose boards of the cabin. It sounded different now, sharper, like it carried something with it. He stared at them, the weight of everything pressing in at once. 10 years ago, he had made a choice without thinking. Now, every part of him knew that whatever came next would not be simple, and it would not be small. He opened his mouth again, ready to push back, to ask more, to find some way to slow this down. But before he could speak, one of the horses outside let out a sharp, uneasy sound. All four of them turned toward the door at the same time. And just like that, the quiet he had built for himself began to crack. The horse outside let out another sharp sound, louder this time, followed by the restless stomp of hooves against dry ground. It was not the kind of noise a calm animal made. It was a warning. He moved first, instinct taking over before thought could catch up. His hand reached for the rifle leaning against the wall by the door, fingers closing around the worn wood like it had done 100 times before. Stay back, he said, his voice low. The three women did not argue, but they did not look afraid either. Instead, they shifted slightly, each one turning just enough to give themselves a clear line of sight toward the door and the windows. They moved like people who had learned the hard way how quickly things could change. That unsettled him more than the noise outside. He stepped closer to the door and paused, listening. The wind still moved across the land, but beneath it there was something else now, a faint rhythm. Not one horse? More? His jaw tightened. You expecting anyone? He asked without turning around. No, the one in the center replied. Then we got company, he muttered. He pushed the door open just enough to look out. The sunlight hit hard after the dim cabin, forcing him to squint. For a second, all he saw was dust drifting across the yard. Then shapes began to form in the distance, riders, not close yet, but coming. He opened the door wider and stepped out onto the porch, lifting the rifle slightly as his eyes adjusted. Behind him he could hear the women moving as well, their footsteps quiet but certain as they followed him outside. The riders were still far enough away that their faces could not be seen, but there was no mistaking their direction. Straight for the ranch. He counted quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe more behind the dust. A familiar weight settled in his chest, the same one he had felt 10 years ago. Trouble had a way of finding him, no matter how far he tried to stay from it. You said the world you come from hasn't grown quieter, he said, without looking back. Looks like it followed you here. It was always going to, the one on the right replied. That answer made him glance over his shoulder. You knew this might happen? We knew it could, the one in the center said. He let out a short breath. Would have been nice to hear that before you walked in asking for marriage. There was no time, she said. There's always time to warn a man he might be stepping into a fight, he shot back. Her expression did not change. Would you have listened? That stopped him. He turned back toward the riders, watching them draw closer. Dust rose behind them in long trails, marking their path like a scar across the land. Maybe not, he admitted. The three women stepped up beside him now, standing shoulder to shoulder. They did not hide behind him. They did not look to him for protection. They stood with him. That detail did not go unnoticed. Who are they? He asked. The one on the left narrowed her eyes, studying the approaching group. Men who believe we belong to them. His grip tightened on the rifle. "That's so. They will not stop easily," she added. "They never do," he replied. Silence settled again, but it was different now, tense, waiting. The riders were close enough now that he could make out more detail. Their posture, their pace, the way they held themselves in the saddle. These were not lost travelers or traders passing through. They rode with purpose. And they were not slowing down. He stepped off the porch and into the yard, boots crunching against the dry earth. The women followed without being told. "You can still ride out," he said quietly, though his eyes stayed fixed ahead. "Head west, cut through the low hills. Might lose them." "We are not running," the one in the center said. He gave a small nod. He had expected that answer. "Then you better be ready," he said. "We are," the one on the right replied. He glanced at them briefly, taking in the calm in their faces. It was not the kind of calm that came from ignorance. It came from experience. "You've faced them before," he said. "Yes, and you came here anyway." "Yes," he shook his head slightly. "Either you're the bravest people I've ever met, or the most stubborn. Sometimes they are the same," the one on the left said. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched his face for a second before fading. The riders slowed as they reached the edge of the yard, spreading out just enough to hold their ground without closing in completely. It was a careful move, measured. The man in front sat tall in his saddle, his gaze moving from the cowboy to the three women and back again. There was no rush in him, no sign of doubt. "You've traveled far?" the man called out, his voice carrying across the space between them. "Further than you should have." No one answered right away. The cowboy shifted his stance slightly, placing himself just a step ahead of the others, not blocking them, just enough to show he was part of this now. "You're on my land," he said. "State your business and be quick about it." The man's eyes flicked to him, measuring, weighing. "This does not concern you." "It does now," he replied. A faint smile touched the rider's face, though it held no warmth. "You don't understand what you're stepping into?" He almost laughed at that. "Been hearing that a lot today." The three women remained silent, but their presence was steady, unshaken. The rider's gaze shifted back to them. "You were told not to leave." "We were told many things," the one in the center said. "We chose differently." A ripple of tension moved through the group of riders behind him. Not loud, but enough to be felt. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," the man said. "No," she replied. "We are making it clear." The cowboy glanced between them, picking up on the weight behind their words. This was not just about running away or being chased. There was something deeper here. Something tied to rules, to expectations, to a life he did not fully understand. "You planning to take them back?" he asked, his voice steady. The rider looked at him again. "They will return." "Doesn't sound like they agree," he said. "They will," the man repeated, more firmly this time. The cowboy shifted his rifle slightly, not raising it but not lowering it either. "That's not how it works here." The wind picked up again, stronger now, pushing dust between them in uneven waves. For a moment no one moved. Then the rider leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "You think this is about land or distance," he said. "It is not. It is about order." The cowboy frowned. "Order?" "Yes, the kind that keeps things from falling apart." He shook his head. "Looks to me like you're the one bringing trouble." The man's expression hardened just a fraction. "You saved them once? That does not give you the right to interfere again." A quiet tension passed through the three women at those words, but none of them stepped back. "It wasn't about rights back then," the cowboy said. "And it ain't about rights now. Then what is it about?" the rider asked. He paused for a second, the answer forming slower this time. "Choice," he said finally. The word hung in the air, heavier than expected. The rider's eyes narrowed slightly. "Choice has consequences." "So does taking it away," the cowboy replied. Another silence followed, thicker than before. Behind the lead rider, the others shifted in their saddles, hands moving just slightly, enough to show they were ready if things turned. The cowboy felt it too. The moment where talk starts to run out and something else begins. He glanced at the three women beside him. They stood firm, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Whatever path they had chosen, they were not turning back now. And as the wind carried the dust between both sides, he realized something that settled deep in his bones. This was no longer just their fight. It had become his the moment he decided not to walk away. The rider straightened slightly, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is your last chance," he said. The cowboy tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes steady. "Then I suggest you make it count," he replied. And somewhere beneath the rising wind and the shifting dust, the line between words and action began to disappear. The air felt tight, like the land itself was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, moving in uneven bursts across the yard, lifting dust and dropping it again without direction. Every man and woman standing there knew the next few moments would decide more than just who stayed and who left. The cowboy shifted his footing slightly, steadying himself. His heart was not racing, but it was not calm either. It sat somewhere in between, heavy and aware. He had been in tense situations before, but this one carried a different weight. This was not just about a fight or a standoff. It was about something deeper, something that had been building for 10 years without him even knowing it. The rider at the front studied him closely, as if trying to understand what kind of man stood before him. "You are choosing a hard road," he said. The cowboy gave a small nod. "Seems like that road found me first." Behind him, the 3 Lakota women stood unshaken. Their presence was steady, but there was something else now. A quiet readiness. Not just for what might happen next, but for what this moment meant. This was not the first time they had faced these men, but it felt different now. The place, the timing, the man standing beside them. Everything had come together in a way that felt final. "You still have time to step aside?" the rider continued. "This is not your burden." The cowboy let out a slow breath. "Funny thing about burdens. Sometimes they don't ask permission." The rider's gaze hardened. "You think this is about bravery. It is not. It is about understanding your place." That word again, place. The cowboy glanced briefly at the women beside him. He could feel it now. This was not just about control or power. It was about tradition, about expectations that had been set long before any of them were born. "You keep talking about place," he said. "Looks to me like they're standing exactly where they chose to." The one in the center stepped forward just half a pace. "We are not leaving," she said, her voice calm but firm. A ripple of tension passed through the riders again, not loud but sharp enough to feel. The lead rider exhaled slowly, as if weighing his next words carefully. "You do not understand what you are walking away from." "We understand enough," the one on the right replied. "And what you walk into," he pressed. No one answered that right away. Because the truth was, even the cowboy did not fully know what lay ahead. He understood the danger in front of him, that part was clear. But what came after, what kind of life this choice would shape, that was still a shadow. The one on the left finally spoke, her voice quieter but no less certain. "We are not afraid of what comes next." The rider looked at her, and for a brief moment something flickered in his expression, not anger. Something closer to frustration. "You should be," he said. The cowboy stepped forward now, closing the distance just a little more. Not enough to provoke, but enough to make his stance clear. "They made their choice," he said. "You heard them." The rider's eyes shifted back to him. "And you? Have you made yours?" That question landed harder than any before it. For a second, everything seemed to slow. The cowboy could feel the weight of it pressing in. The quiet life he had built, the years spent keeping to himself. The memory of that day 10 years ago, when he acted without thinking. And now this moment, standing at the edge of something far bigger than he had planned. He glanced at the 3 women again. They were watching him, not with pressure, not with expectation, but with something else. Trust. That was what made it harder. He turned back to the rider. "I'm still standing here, ain't I?" It was not a full answer, but it was enough. The rider's jaw tightened slightly. "Then you accept what follows." "I accept what's in front of me," the cowboy replied. "The rest we'll figure out." The wind rose again, stronger this time, pushing through the yard with a low, steady force. It carried the scent of dry earth and something else. Something changing. Behind the lead rider, one of the men shifted his position, his horse stepping forward half a stride. It was small, but it broke the stillness just enough, the cowboy noticed. So did the women, hands moved slightly. Not reaching for weapons fully, but close enough to show readiness. The line was getting thinner. "You are forcing this?" the rider said, his voice firmer now. "No," the one in the center replied. "We are ending it." Those words hit differently. Ending it, not running. Not escaping, ending. The cowboy felt something settle inside him at that. A clarity he had not had before. This was not just about protecting them in the moment. It was about standing with them in something they had already chosen. The rider seemed to sense the shift too. "This will not end the way you think," he said. "Maybe not," the cowboy answered. "But it'll end different than you planned." A long silence followed. The kind that stretches until it feels like it might snap. Dust moved between them, blurring the edges of both sides just enough to make everything feel uncertain. The cowboy adjusted his grip on the rifle, not raising it, but not hiding it either. His eyes stayed locked on the man in front of him. Beside him, the three women stood firm, their shoulders squared, their expressions steady. They were not stepping back. And neither was he. The rider straightened fully in his saddle, his presence sharpening. "Last chance?" he said again. The cowboy did not hesitate this time. "No," the word was simple, but it carried everything. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the air shifted. Not with movement, but with decision, the kind that cannot be taken back. The horses grew restless, sensing the tension rising to its peak. One stamped hard against the ground, another pulled slightly at the reins. The men behind the lead rider tensed, their posture tightening, waiting for a signal. The cowboy felt it too, that edge. That moment where everything balances before tipping. He took one small step forward. Not aggressive, not fearful, certain. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Turn around, ride out." "Leave it here?" For the first time, the rider did not answer right away. His eyes moved past the cowboy, settling on the three women. Something passed there, something unspoken. Something tied to history, to expectations, to a life that had already begun to slip out of his control. Then he looked back at the cowboy. "You think this is about control," he said slowly. "It is about responsibility," the cowboy frowned slightly. "Whose?" "All of ours," the rider replied. That answer lingered. Because for the first time it did not sound like a threat. It sounded like a warning. The wind pushed harder now, swirling dust around their boots, rising between them like a barrier that refused to settle. The cowboy could feel the moment slipping closer to its breaking point. Every instinct told him what might come next. Every part of him knew there was no clean way out of it. But still, something held, something kept the line from breaking just yet. The three women stepped forward then, not behind him, but beside him again, closing whatever small gap remained. The one in the center spoke, her voice clear and unwavering. "We are not going back." The rider's expression hardened once more. And in that instant, with the wind rising, the dust thick in the air, and both sides standing their ground, it became clear. The next move would decide everything. And no one was ready to take it. The wind kept moving, but something else shifted first. It was not a gun raised or a sudden charge. It was the look in the lead rider's eyes. The kind of look that comes when a man realizes the path ahead will cost more than he planned to pay. He studied the three Lakota women again, longer this time. Not as someone trying to control them, but as someone seeing them clearly for the first time in a long while. "You would stand here," he said slowly, "against everything that raised you." The one in the center did not hesitate. "We are standing for it." "Not against it?" That answer landed in a way that quieted something in the air. Even the men behind him seemed to ease, just a fraction. The cowboy did not move. His rifle stayed steady in his hands, but his eyes shifted between them, catching the change in tone. The edge was still there, but it was no longer sharp enough to cut right through. The rider exhaled, long and measured, then straightened in his saddle. "And you?" he said, turning his attention back to the cowboy. "You would take this on, knowing it may not be simple." The cowboy gave a small nod. "Nothing worth standing forever is." There was no pride in his voice, no challenge. Just truth. Another silence followed, but this one felt different. It was not the kind that comes before a fight. It was the kind that comes before a decision. Behind the lead rider, one of the men shifted again, but this time it was not out of readiness. It was uncertainty. The rider noticed. He looked back at his own men, then forward again, weighing something that could not be seen but could be felt by everyone there. "You speak of choice," he said finally. "But choice has a way of pulling others with it." The one on the right stepped forward slightly. "We are not asking anyone to follow us." "No," he said, "but others will watch." "Others will learn?" "Then let them," the one on the left replied. "Let them see that a life can be chosen, not just given." Those words carried far beyond the yard. Even the cowboy felt it. This was bigger than him, bigger than a single moment or a single ranch. The rider's grip on his reins loosened just a little. Not enough to show weakness, but enough to show change. "And what of him?" he asked, nodding toward the cowboy. "What place does he hold in this choice?" All three women turned to look at him then, not demanding, not expecting, just waiting. The cowboy felt that same weight settle in again, but this time it did not feel as heavy, it felt clear. He stepped forward, lowering the rifle just a bit, though he did not let it hang loose. "I don't know everything about your world," he said. "Never claimed to, but I know this much. No one should be forced into a life they didn't choose." He paused, glancing briefly at the women before continuing. "And if standing with them means stepping into something bigger than me, then so be it." The rider watched him closely, searching for hesitation. There was none. A long breath left him, slower this time. Then something shifted for good. He pulled gently on the reins, turning his horse just slightly to the side. It was not a full retreat, but it was no longer a stance of confrontation. The men behind him noticed immediately. Some looked surprised, others relieved, though none spoke. "This is not the end of this matter," the rider said, his voice steady but no longer sharp. "It doesn't have to be," the cowboy replied. The rider nodded once, a small, almost reluctant motion. "No, it does not." He looked at the three Lakota women one last time. There was still tension there, still a trace of what had been, but it was no longer holding the same power. "You have made your path," he said. "Walk it well." "We will," the one in the center answered. With that he turned his horse fully, signaling to the others. One by one, they followed, the dust rising again as they began to ride away from the ranch. No one moved until they were far enough that their shapes blurred into the horizon. Only then did the tension break. The cowboy let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. His shoulders eased and he lowered the rifle completely. "Well," he muttered, "that went better than it could have." The one on the right gave a small smile. "It did." He turned to look at them, really looked this time, without the weight of immediate danger pressing in. "You knew they might back down," he said. "We hoped," the one on the left replied. "That's a risky thing to bet on," he said. She nodded. "So is everything else we chose." He could not argue with that. For a moment none of them spoke. The wind settled again, softer now, like the land was finally exhaling after holding itself tight for too long. The cowboy set the rifle aside and picked up his hat, brushing the dust from it before placing it back on his head. Then he looked at them, a different kind of question forming. "So," he said, "about what you asked earlier." The three women exchanged a glance, but this time there was something lighter in it, not uncertainty, but patience. "We meant what we said," the one in the center replied. "I figured as much," he said. He stepped closer, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. "You sure about this?" he asked. "All of it. The choice, the path, everything that comes with it?" The one in the center met his gaze. "We are." The others nodded in quiet agreement. He studied them for a moment longer, then let out a slow breath. "Then I guess I've got a decision to make." "You do," she said softly. He looked out across the land, the same land that had been his quiet place for years. It did not feel as quiet anymore, not in a bad way, just different, like something new had stepped into it. When he looked back at them, there was a small, genuine smile on his face. The kind that comes when a man finally stops fighting the direction things are going. "You three don't do anything the easy way, do you?" he said. "No," the one on the right replied, her voice carrying a hint of humor now. "We do not." He nodded once, then tipped his hat slightly. "All right," he said. "Then I reckon I won't either." The words were simple, but they carried the answer. For a moment the three women just looked at him as if letting it settle in. Then the one in the center stepped forward, her expression softening in a way it had not before. "Is that your answer?" she asked. He met her gaze, steady and sure. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The wind moved gently through the yard, no longer restless, no longer sharp, just calm. And for the first time in a long while, the land did not feel like it was waiting for something to happen. It felt like something had finally begun.